So far, our focus has been purely on showing or hiding parts of a page and also on protecting our routes. But when it comes to implementing authentication and authorization in real-world applications, you should also know how to access protected API resources. For example, here on the admin page, we have the list of orders, and this list is supposed to come from an API endpoint. Now, as you can imagine, this API endpoint should only be accessible to logged in users who are part of the admin role. Now, currently on this page, we don't see the list of orders, and in this lecture, I'm going to show you how to fix this problem. Now, before we get started, if you're coding along with me, I want you to go to jwt.io and generate a new token with admin set to true. Then get back to fake backend and replace this hard-coded token with a new one, okay? Now let's see how we can display the list of orders on our admin page. So here in fake backend, if you scroll down, on line 39, you can see my implementation of a fake API endpoint at this address. So look at the logic here. We look at the request headers, and if you have a header by this name, authorization, and the value of this header is bearer plus our token, then we're going to send a response with the status 200, and in the body of the request, we're going to include our orders. Now, as I told you before, you should implement this logic in your API endpoints on the server. So you need to check for the existence of the authorization header. You should check the value of this header, ensure it's a valid token that is not expired. Then you would grant access to API resources. Now, once again, you don't need to manually write all this code. You can use one of the provided libraries on jwt.io for your platform. Now, that aside, let's focus on the front end. So let's open up the order service. Here we have a method getOrders, and in this method, we send an HTTP GET request to our orders endpoint. Now, the reason we don't get the list of orders is because we have not included the authorization header. So let me show you how we can add the authorization header to this request. First, we need to create a headers object. So let headers equal new headers. This object has a method called append. Here we need to pass a name and a value. So the name of the header is authorization, and the value is bearer space, and here we need to add our token. So let's get it from the local storage .getItem of token. Then we can add this here. Next, we need to create a request options object. So let options equal new request options. This type is defined in Angular/HTTP. Okay? Now, when initializing this object, here we pass an object. In this object, we set the headers property to this headers object we created earlier. But we get a compilation error because the type of this headers property in this request options object is different from this headers object we created earlier. The reason for this is because this headers type is defined natively in your browser, but we want to use the headers type defined in Angular. So we need to go on the top and explicitly import the headers type from Angular/HTTP. Now the compilation error is gone. So we created this options object, and then we can pass it as the second argument of the get method. So second argument, you can see we have an optional parameter of type request options args. You can pass this options object here. Now let's test the application. Back in the browser, on the admin page, you can see we have 3 orders. So when building APIs on the server, if you want to secure certain API endpoints, you should ensure that there is an authorization header in the request. And the value of this header should be bearer with a valid JSON Web Token. And this means on the client, in your Angular apps, whenever you need to access protected API endpoints, you should always supply this authorization header. But as you can see, writing all this code in multiple places is repetitive and time consuming. So let me show you a faster way. In Angular 2-JWT library that we added earlier, we have a class called authHTTP. So here in the constructor, if I change the type of this HTTP parameter from HTTP that is defined in Angular to authHTTP, look, this class is defined in Angular 2-JWT. Now, I don't know why my auto import plugin is importing this type from this path. You don't need to repeat Angular 2-JWT. Let's simplify this. Now, this class, authHTTP, has the exact same interface as the HTTP class in Angular. So you can see currently we don't have any compilation errors here. And if we type this.http dot, we get all the methods available in the HTTP class defined in Angular. However, all these methods internally implement some logic like this. So they get the token from the local storage and add it as an authorization header to the request. With this, we can delete all this code, and we don't need to pass an options object here. So all you have to do is to change the type of HTTP field in this class from HTTP to authHTTP. Now, one last thing before we finish this lecture. If you need to use the standard HTTP service in other methods in this class, perhaps you want to access certain API endpoints that are not protected, you can have two parameters here. So let's rename this to authHTTP. I'm also going to add the standard HTTP service defined in Angular. Now, in this method, we're using authHTTP. In another method, I can use this.http. So this is how we access protected API resources on the server.